humiliating step down. Something inside her hardened after that.
She was the second woman to be hanged inside Hamlin Prison's execution chamber, and her final words were allegedly,
What really happened to female Nazi guards after World War II? She was just 22 years old when she walked toward the gallows. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile witnesses never forgot. To the outside world, she looked harmless. Inside the camps, she was something else entirely. But she was not an exception. Over 3,500 German women served as concentration camp guards during the Holocaust, and their stories have been buried by history for far too long.
Pierre Point later remarked that her calmness was almost eerie, unlike anything he had ever seen before.
What really happened to them when the war finally ended will send. From shop girls to executioners. When most people imagine Nazi concentration camps, they picture men in black SS uniforms standing at the gates with cold expressions. But there was another group of perpetrators that history has largely forgotten, and they were women.
She learned how to command, how to punish, how to make others afraid. She wasn't a monster yet, but she was well on her way.
Over 3,500 German women served as concentration camp guards during the Second World War. They called themselves Aufseherinnen, which means female overseers, and they were responsible for some of the most horrific acts ever documented. These women did not emerge from some special factory that produced monsters. They came from ordinary German families living ordinary German lives. They had worked on farms and in factories before the war. They had styled hair in salons and sold goods in shops. They served as tram conductors and cleaned houses for wealthy families. The average age of a female guard was 26 years old, but some were teenagers as young as 17 when they first put on the gray uniform. So how did ordinary German women transform into concentration camp guards who would beat, torture, and murder innocent prisoners without hesitation?
She was also present at selections and personally chose those prisoners who were sent straight to the gas chambers.
The answer begins in May of 1939, when the Nazi regime opened a new concentration camp called Ravensbrück. The camp was located about 90 kilometers north of Berlin, situated beside a peaceful lake and surrounded by forest. Ravensbrück was the first major concentration camp designed for female prisoners, and it needed female guards to oversee them. The SS put out recruitment notices across Germany, and the offer they made was difficult for working-class women to refuse. A female guard at Ravensbrück earned 185 Reichsmarks per month, while a woman working in a textile factory earned just 76 Reichsmarks. That meant becoming a camp guard more than doubled a woman's salary overnight. On top of the generous wages, guards received free housing, free meals, and free uniforms. Hermine Braunsteiner was one of the first women to volunteer for service. She had been working long hours in a munitions factory when she heard about the positions at Ravensbrück. She signed up in August of 1939, and her life changed forever. Within a few years, she would earn the nickname the Stomping Mare for her habit of kicking women to death with her steel-studded boots. In the early years of the war, most female guards were volunteers who genuinely believed in Nazi ideology. They had grown up as members of the League of German Girls, where they learned to worship Adolf Hitler and despise Jews, Slavs, and Roma people. But as the war dragged on and the camp system expanded across occupied Europe, there were not enough volunteers to fill all the positions. The Nazis began conscripting women through the German labor exchange. Young women received notices ordering them to report to Ravensbrück for mandatory service. They had no choice in the matter and no right to appeal the decision. Training for new guards lasted approximately 4 weeks, though by 1944, some women received as little as 1 week of preparation before being sent to oversee thousands of prisoners. The training program included instruction on camp rules, methods for counting prisoners, techniques for preventing escapes at any cost, and how to shoot a firearm. Every Saturday evening from 5 to 6 o'clock, trainee guards attended mandatory ideological sessions. They watched anti-Semitic propaganda films like Jude Seuss that portrayed Jewish people as subhuman parasites threatening the German nation. Instructors taught them that the prisoners deserved everything that happened to them because they were dangerous enemies of Germany. Germaine Tillion was a French anthropologist who was imprisoned at Ravensbrück for her work with the resistance. From inside the camp, she observed dozens of new guards arriving over the years, and she noticed a disturbing pattern in how quickly they changed. One new guard arrived at Ravensbrück looking nervous and frightened. She was only 20 years old, and she clearly had no idea what she had gotten herself into. When she accidentally walked in front of a prisoner during her first days at the camp, she apologized politely and said, "Excuse me." 4 days later, Tillion watched the same young woman beating prisoners with a rubber truncheon without any hesitation or remorse. 4 days was all it took to transform a polite young woman into a brutal torturer. The camp system had been specifically designed to break down moral resistance through peer pressure, institutional permission, and the complete dehumanization of prisoners. The system worked exactly as the Nazis intended. The prisoners gave the cruelest guards nicknames that reflected their particular methods of torture. There was Bloody Brigitte, who beat prisoners until blood covered their bodies. There was the woman with dogs, who set her German shepherd on anyone who displeased her. There was the beautiful Beast, whose youth and attractiveness made her sadism even more disturbing. As Allied forces began closing in on Germany in the final months of the war, these women faced a terrifying question that they had never considered before. What would happen to them when the camps were liberated and the world discovered what they had done behind the barbed wire fences? When hell collapsed. By January of 1945, the Thousand-Year Reich that Adolf Hitler had promised was crumbling after just 12 years. Soviet forces were pushing relentlessly from the east, and American and British armies were advancing from the west. Inside the concentration camps, female guards could hear the distant thunder of artillery growing closer every day. Orders came down from Berlin to the camp commandants: evacuate all prisoners who could still walk, destroy any evidence that might be used in future trials, burn all documents that recorded what had happened. At Auschwitz, female guards were put in charge of organizing the death marches. Tens of thousands of starving, freezing prisoners were forced to walk westward through the Polish winter while Soviet troops approached from behind. The rules were simple and merciless. Any prisoner who stumbled was shot. Any prisoner who stopped walking was shot. The snow along the march routes turned red with blood for miles. Dorothea Binz was in charge of evacuation operations at Ravensbrück. She was 24 years old, and prisoners knew her as the beautiful devil because of the contrast between her attractive appearance and her enthusiastic cruelty. She was famous for taking romantic evening walks around the camp with her SS boyfriend to watch women being flogged at the punishment block. Some guards decided not to wait for the Allies to arrive. They threw away their gray uniforms and burned their identification papers. They changed into civilian clothes and tried to disappear into the chaos of collapsing Germany, where 11 million displaced persons were flooding across the landscape. When British forces reached Bergen-Belsen concentration camp on April 15, 1945, they encountered scenes that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. There were approximately 13,000 unburied corpses rotting in piles throughout the camp. Thousands more prisoners were dying of typhus, starvation, and dysentery. The smell of death was so overwhelming that soldiers could detect it from miles away. Standing among the survivors and the corpses were the guards. Women like Irma Gresser, Elizabeth Volkenrath, and Wanna Bormann. British soldiers were shocked by what they saw, but they were equally shocked by the appearance of the guards themselves. These women looked completely ordinary. They could have been shopkeepers, or secretaries, or housewives. There was nothing in their faces or manner that suggested they were capable of mass murder. One British nurse who helped process the captured female guards wrote that they looked like any other German women she might pass on the street. But the survivors became completely hysterical at the mere glimpse of them. The Allies did not believe a word of it, and within months, the first major trials would begin. The Day of Judgment. In September of 1945, a British military tribunal convened in the German town of Lüneburg to conduct the first major war crimes trial involving concentration camp personnel. The proceedings would become known as the Belsen trial. 45 defendants sat in the dock, facing charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. 16 of the defendants were female guards, and 3 of them would ultimately hang for their crimes. The most famous defendant was Irma Grisi, who was just 21 years old. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and delicate features that made her look more like a film actress than a mass murderer. Newspapers around the world became obsessed with her appearance, calling her the beautiful beast. They could not understand how someone so young and attractive could be responsible for such horrific crimes. The testimony that emerged during the trial answered that question in devastating detail. Survivor Ilona Stein described watching Grisi beat a woman who had gone to speak with her daughter through the camp fence. Grisi removed her leather belt and beat the woman repeatedly. Then she beat her with her fists. When the victim fell, Grisi stood on top of her body and stomped until she stopped moving. Dr. Gisela Perl, who served as camp gynecologist at Auschwitz, provided devastating testimony. She described how Grisi would visit the medical barracks and order surgical procedures performed without anesthesia. Grisi watched these operations with expressions of what Perl called orgiastic pleasure. Grisi had personally whipped open the breasts of female prisoners, then forced Perl to try to save their lives. Wanna Bormann was 52 years old and was never seen without her German Shepherd attack dog. Witnesses described watching her set the dog on prisoners for minor infractions. Women were torn apart by the animal, while Bormann stood and watched with satisfaction. The trial lasted 2 months. On November 17, 1945, 11 defendants received death sentences. 3 were women: Irma Gresser, Elizabeth Volkenrath, and Wanna Bormann. British executioner Albert Pierrepoint later wrote about Irma Grisi's final moments. She walked out of her cell laughing and seemed as bonny a girl as one could ever wish to meet. She refused a hood. Her last word was schnell, meaning quick. She was 22 years old when she died on December 13, 1945. Across Europe, more trials followed. Maria Mandl, the highest-ranking woman at Auschwitz, who was responsible for approximately 500,000 deaths, was hanged in Poland on January 24, 1948. The Stutthof trials produced the war's most dramatic executions. On July 4, 1946, 5 female guards were publicly hanged before approximately 200,000 spectators. Former prisoners volunteered to serve as executioners. Jenny Wanda Bachmann was 24 years old and called the Beautiful Spectre. At her trial, she flirted with guards and arranged her hair while listening to testimony about her murders. When sentenced to death, she smiled and said, "Life is indeed a pleasure, and pleasures are usually short." The crowd watched as she was hanged alongside her fellow guards, the ones who vanished. While some female guards faced trials and executions, Hundreds of others managed to escape into the confusion of post-war Europe and build entirely new lives for themselves. The most remarkable escape story belongs to Hermine Braunsteiner, who managed to hide in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. At the Majdanek concentration camp, prisoners knew her by a terrifying nickname. They called her Kobila, which is the Polish word for mare. She earned this name by stomping women to death with her heavy boots that had been fitted with steel plates. Witnesses saw her grab small children by the hair and throw them onto trucks heading to the gas chambers. After Germany surrendered, Braunsteiner returned to Austria. She was arrested in 1946 for crimes at Ravensbrück, but authorities did not know about Majdanek. She served 3 years in prison and was released in 1949. Then she met Russell Ryan, an American construction worker on vacation. They fell in love and married in 1958. The next year, she moved to the United States. In 1963, she became a naturalized American citizen. For years, Hermine Braunsteiner Ryan lived quietly as a housewife in the Maspeth neighborhood of Queens, New York. She kept her home clean and was friendly with neighbors. Nobody suspected anything, but Simon Wiesenthal, the famous Nazi hunter, was looking for her. In 1964, his investigators traced her to New York. When a reporter knocked on her door, she answered in an apron. Her first words were, "My God, I knew this would happen. This is the end of everything for me." Her husband Russell could not believe it. "My wife would not hurt a fly," he told reporters. On August 7, 1973, Hermine Braunsteiner Ryan became the first Nazi war criminal extradited from the United States. Her trial in Dusseldorf lasted 5.5 years, the longest in West German history. In 1981, she received a life sentence. She was released in 1996 due to diabetes complications and died in 1999 at age 79. But Braunsteiner was eventually caught. Many others never were. Elfriede Rinkel served as a guard at Ravensbrück with an attack dog from 1944 to 1945. After the war, she immigrated to San Francisco and married Fred Rinkel in 1959. Fred was a German Jew whose parents had both died in the Holocaust. For 42 years, Elfriede attended synagogue with her Jewish husband. She donated to Jewish charities. She never told him what she had done. Fred died in 2004 without ever learning the truth. Investigators found Elfriede shortly after. She confessed immediately, but showed no remorse. "That is so far back," she said. "Everything is forgotten. Forget it." She was deported to Germany in 2006 at age 84. Prosecutors declined to file charges. She died in 2018 without ever facing trial. Of approximately 3,500 female guards, fewer than 77 were ever brought to trial. That represents roughly 2% of the total. Living with murder. Most early releases came between 1951 and 1953, as Cold War politics shifted priorities toward rebuilding West Germany rather than punishing Nazi war criminals. Hertha Ehlert had been sentenced to 15 years at the Belsen trial. She was released in 1954 after serving just 9 years. She later described what it felt like to return to German society. When she left prison, Germans were completely focused on rebuilding and looking toward the future. Nobody wanted to talk about the concentration camps. It felt as if that entire chapter of history was being deliberately erased. This was true across Germany in the 1950s and 1960s. The economic miracle was underway. Jobs were plentiful. Former guards could reinvent themselves by changing names, moving to different cities, and inventing new histories. What is most disturbing is how few of these women ever expressed genuine remorse. Hertha Botha served as a guard at Ravensbrück, Stutthof, and Bergen-Belsen. In 1999, when she was in her 80s, she was asked if she believed she had done anything wrong. Her answer was chilling. She said she had not made any mistakes. The mistake was that the place where she worked happened to be a concentration camp, but she had no choice. If she had refused, she would have been imprisoned herself. But historical evidence proves this defense was false. Women who requested transfers away from camp duty faced no serious consequences. They were simply sent back to work in factories. Former guard Anna Hempel admitted this at her trial. She said she could have requested a transfer at any time. Several women she knew had done exactly that and were reassigned to factory jobs. But Hempel stayed because the camp paid better. One woman discovered in the 1980s that her mother had served at Ravensbrück. She said it felt as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly given way. Everything she believed about her mother seemed like a lie. She could not understand how the woman who raised her with such kindness could have stood by while innocent women suffered. She never received an explanation. Many children of perpetrators never did. The problem of female evil. The trials of female Nazi guards forced society to confront something deeply uncomfortable. Everything people believed about women seemed to be contradicted by the evidence. At the Belsen trial, the prosecutor introduced Irma Gries by noting she was a beautiful woman. No male defendant received similar commentary about physical appearance. Newspapers obsessed over the looks of female guards because they could not reconcile attractiveness with cruelty. This revealed deep assumptions about gender. Women were supposed to be nurturers and mothers who protected the innocent. The idea that women could participate enthusiastically in genocide challenged everything society believed about femininity. Survivors often contradicted these comfortable assumptions. Henrika Ostrovska explained that female guards were sometimes considered worse than men. Male guards would beat you physically, then leave you alone. Female guards would work to destroy your spirit and sense of self first. Dr. Gisela Perl wrote that the most disturbing truth about these women was not that they were monsters. The most disturbing truth was that they were ordinary women who chose cruelty when they could have chosen compassion. Historian Wendy Lower spent years researching female perpetrators. Her book, Hitler's Furies, documented approximately 500,000 German women who went to occupied territories. Many witnessed atrocities, and some participated directly. Erna Petri was an SS wife in Ukraine who found 6 Jewish boys aged 6 to 12 who had escaped a transport. She brought them home and fed them. Then she led them to a pit and shot each child in the back of the head. When interrogated years later, she explained, "I wanted to prove myself to the men." These women were products of a system designed to transform ordinary people into killers. The same factors that produced male perpetrators also produced female ones. Ideological indoctrination that defined victims as subhuman. Economic incentives that rewarded participation. Outro. What are your thoughts on this forgotten chapter of history? Share them in the comments below.